Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the National Health Council's inaugural International Patient Forum. I'm Randy Ruda, CEO of the National Health Council. The mission of the National Health Council is to provide a united voice for the 160 million Americans living with chronic conditions and disabilities, and their families and caregivers. Created by and for patient organizations more than 100 years ago, the National Health Council brings diverse organizations together to forge consensus and drive patient-centered health policy. The National Health Council recognizes the international nature of healthcare advocacy, even for patient groups that operate primarily in the United States. This is our first International Patient Forum, with a second forum scheduled for the fall. This meeting is designed to set the stage for a broader discussion and prioritize international issues important to the patient community and to determine our next steps. Last fall, we surveyed our membership about international patient issues. Most member organizations that responded strongly agreed that they are interested in the National Health Council's facilitated meetings to help be more informed, involved, and influential in international patient health dialogue and decisions. I'm pleased to say that we have sponsors for today's event and for our ongoing work. Let me recognize them as Astellas, Merck, and Johnson & Johnson. Thank you so much for this critical support and for joining us today with this first forum. I do have the assignment of sharing some housekeeping details with you. So for participants, please rename yourself in Zoom if you can and include your organization's name. We're recording all sessions, so you'll be able to access them later. That'll be true for those of you that are participating as well as our full membership. We'll have a 5-minute break with a 1-minute mindfulness exercise, which has become a tradition at the National Health Council. And I would encourage you to take time to stretch and focus on your well-being during those few minutes that we've allocated to your health and well-being. For everyone but the speakers, I would ask you to have your system on mute, maybe your videos off. But then as we engage in discussion and you have questions, I would encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A and we will draw from those. And if you're called on, please then put your video and sound back on. And if you have comments, please put those in the comment section and that will become part of our record for today's meeting. If you have any questions about Zoom links or technical issues or agenda, just email those to nhcmeetings@nhccouncil.org and we'll follow up with that. And please remember, as we conclude today, to complete the evaluation form. That gives us really good information about how we approach these issues, how we engage our membership, how we support our sponsors and recognize their support. Just definitely share with us your thoughts in that evaluation. So let me talk briefly about our agenda today, the program itself. Our program has 3 parts. We'll begin with a kickoff conversation about patient issues, advocacy, and engagement globally. After that, we'll hear from a panel of National Health Council member leaders speaking about their challenges and the opportunities that they see in this environment. And then lastly, we'll have a facilitated open discussion for everyone to contribute, ask questions, and consider next steps for the National Health Council in supporting global knowledge exchange, member benefit, and mission impact. So now let's get started. I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker, Donna Cryer. Donna is president and CEO of Global Liver Institute, which is the only patient-driven liver health nonprofit operating in the United States, Europe, and the UK. I'm delighted to have her join me as we kick off this important conversation, really kind of a fireside chat, if you will. Donna has channeled her personal experience as a patient with inflammatory bowel disease and a 27-year liver transplant recipient into professional advocacy across a career in law, policy, consulting, public relations, clinical trial recruitment, and nonprofit management. Donna is an amazing colleague, a true leader, and I'm really excited to welcome her to the stage today. So Donna, Donna, let me just jump in, and I know you have a softer voice today due to allergies, so we will listen carefully. But just to start, how does your organization view its mission regarding patients that live outside the United States?
We view our mission to patients who live outside the United States the same as our mission delivery for patients inside the United States. I think that's what it means to be a truly global organization. It starts by doing a landscape assessment from the point of view and done in conjunction with patients and physicians and community members in different countries to assess what they see as the needs, what they see as their strengths. And I think that a strength-based assessment of each country, of what they can bring to the table and contribute, not just to solving issues in their own country, but contributing to our larger global solution, has made us a stronger organization and really has allowed us to live with an ethos that great ideas can come from anywhere, and they absolutely do.
That's fantastic. Donna, how do you actually specifically engage patients then? How do you find them? How do you kind of engage them in the work that you do, make them feel welcome and heard?
Well, it's not unintentionally, so it's very intentionally that our staff are based across the United States, from our interns to our very senior staff. I'm proud to say that they speak 6-7 languages across our team. So that helps. Many of them split their year between the US and their home countries. For example, our head of communication is from Lebanon, and she's now spending time back home and working from there for half the year. So I really think that authentically has us living, breathing, thinking about ways not so, U.S. centric. And I'm always asking the team to push me to make sure that we are not sort of falling into that natural bias. And my favorite was a 5-page report that one of our interns, who's from a country in Africa, had said that our marquee program, our Advanced Advocacy Academy, was not global enough. So I was like, well, write me a 5-page memo on how to make that more global. And she did, and we're instituting those ideas. And so it's them challenging me, keeping me on my toes as an American, to make sure that we are meeting people where they are and doing things not just in language, but in culture, in tone, and personalized in that way.
Wow, that's such a great example to use. How empowering for this staff person to really be invited to take the lead, share something, that's created by them, and then have her work then be translated into,
Yes.
What you're actually doing. That's terrific. So Donna, what are the issues? As we planned this forum, we thought that there would be issues from patient engagement and advocacy, empowerment, clinical trial and innovation, research, access, and coverage issues in different systems. But for global or for liver patients who are across the globe, what are the kinds of issues that are being surfaced by them for you to consider in your international work?
So certainly access takes on different connotations depending on the country and the health system. And so there are some things that are very easy for us all to get around, like awareness. And so our International NASH Day, has partnered with 73 countries and 120 partners and multiple international medical societies. And the logo is on, bicycle rides in India and T-shirts in Cameroon, and it's just remarkable. So that initial awareness, some of those things translate very well and easily and are adaptable. Where it becomes harder is that last mile or 6 feet, and what does access actually look like? Is it a large academic medical center? Is it a community clinic? Is it a network of community health workers who don't have access to refrigeration? And so figuring out what access actually means in context in that community and how scalable are our solutions is always a challenge. What I try to instill in my team is, I often ask the question, will this work in Seattle and Senegal?
Right.
As sort of a test. Is it a module or a model that is easily customizable and adaptable so it can have the widest use? And if it really doesn't meet that test, it means we need to make it simpler. We need to go back and really think it through so it's easier to use for people who have low levels of resources and high levels of resources, because in any patient community, you're dealing with people who are overworked and often are living with the condition themselves. And so making things easier and simpler and more adaptable is really part of how we are able to scale across communities.
Sure. And so what advice with this, because you've been doing this for a while, you've got a nice track record. I know you've got some real accomplishments that, we've talked about. What advice might you have for other patient groups that maybe have a little bit of a footprint internationally? Maybe they are significant side-by-side colleagues with you as you go to meetings around the globe, or maybe this is just something that they're starting to think about. What advice might you have for them?
I would start by reaching out, making a friend with another advocacy leader in a different country, and just start the conversation and talk about the issues that you have in common, things that you don't, and that may just start to generate ideas, in your mind about how you can take your work forward. Because we work in councils in liver cancer and NASH and in pediatric and rare diseases, those are three very different spaces with three very different needs. And so how to be global in cancer is a very different infrastructure than how to make resources available in genetic samples, for example, in rare diseases. So really just listen and just start a pen pal when conversation with another leader in another country and see where it goes.
That's terrific. Well, I'll invite, I'm watching the Q&A channel, the portal here, to see if anyone has any questions for Donna. So please feel free to put them in that Q&A spot. We've got some little time that we could take and pepper her with questions about all that she's learned and accomplished. But as we wait to see if we will get that participation so early in our meeting, Donna, I know that you do travel internationally. You do go to where patients are gathering. A little bit about where you go and how you decide to go where you do, and kind of the decisions that shape that part of your work.
Right. Well, I'm just back from the UK, which is why my allergies are so bad, because I left Washington, D.C. for such a long time that my immune system forgot. And it really is so meaningful to people to step into their spaces, not always being asked to come into ours. And that is true whether we're talking to marginalized communities within the United States, even if you're just a US-based organization, as it does when you are an international organization. Being humble, I think, has been, so important, and just being vulnerable and honest that I don't know, I'd like to help, but I need you to tell me how to help. And so it's also listening to my team. I realized that in talking with my team, a quarter of them had on the ground, hands-on experience in Africa. So we're leaning into that. Matched with how some of our seed grants had gone. So it's evolved into where we go as to who reaches out to us. We look at our social media analytics. So, who is tapping into our content, who is, how we have incoming requests to do things in several languages, and where we find partners, physician and patient partners. In other countries, we're first responsive to those, and now we're being a little bit more strategic. But to wake up and have an incoming email that Malaysia would like to build its national cancer plan based on your liver cancers council model, is for a patient like me, who's somebody who was just thinking about this from my bedside, or I guess in the bed. I never got to be bedside, I'm in the bed. And to do this now, with researchers who helped save my life and who've retired, and then they're telling other countries and meetings where they go internationally that they should call on us for help. And that's really, really just so heartwarming.
That's just great. And I know it's not always all mission related. I think sometimes you get to have a little fun when you travel abroad. Is that true? Play a
I
concert, perhaps?
I might have helped Beyonce off, with her tour in Edinburgh, and I might have popped down to Coventry to add Harry Styles to that. But I think that was just part of strengthening our relationships and learning about cultural concert cultures in the UK. It was great to connect with mentees who I have who are now in London. And some of the leaders that we have in the rare disease throughout the UK system. So it was a mix of things, as several of my trips are. I think that this is my life that has been enabled by many of the advances that I now have the opportunity to fight for others. And so I think it's as much my obligation to live that life fully as it is to advocate.
Well, you set a very good example for us, Donna. And I did live vicariously knowing that you were at the Beyonce concert, and that made me feel good. But I think what you're saying, though, is just to truly engage. And it really is kind of going where people are and experiencing from their perspective, what it is about having a health condition, but then leading your lives that we could maybe help take forward and be supportive of. So thank you for your leadership. I believe you're staying with us for the full session. So we may have some questions for you as we move forward, but just thank you for all that you do and for participating in this conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So thank you, Donna. And now we'll go to our panel of experts who just have incredible, like Donna, incredible information to share with us, experiences for us to consider and learn from. Our first panelist is Cindy Zagliboilo, President and CEO of the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, former board member, and really a true leader in council at the National Health Council. She served not just as a board member, but as board chair, and continues to be a leadership voice across the National Health Council's work and our membership. Starting her career with the Society in 1985, she considers the National MS Society's mission to be her life's work. She's passionate about building the MS movement, amplifying the voices of people affected by MS, to influence lawmakers and ensure that people know that the National MS Society is a lifelong partner in their MS journeys. Joining Cindy will be Julia Jenkins, the Executive Director of Every Life Foundation for Rare Diseases. Her background is grassroots organizing and legislative advocacy, helping unite more than 180 patient organizations under the Cure the Process campaign. She works to ensure UltraFast was included in the 2012 FDA Safety and Innovation Act, and she's created a great place for synergy across the rare disease community with a hub, and I really am excited to have her join us here today. Similarly, Pat Furlong is the founding president and CEO of the Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, and is the largest nonprofit organization in the United States solely focusing on Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. Its mission is to improve the treatment, quality of life, and long-term outlook for all individuals affected by Duchenne through research, advocacy, education, and compassion. And finally, Selena Gorey is the Chief Executive Officer of Women Heart, the National Coalition for Women with Heart Disease, based in Washington, D.C. Formerly, she was the founding executive director of the Global Alliance for Chronic Diseases, based at the Wellcome Trust in London. From 2009 to 2011, Gorey was the founding managing director, the Foundation for the UN Global Compact. So all four of our panelists bring incredible personal experience, professional success, and a passion for being advocates and really empowering the patients, patient groups, and the patient community in advancing the best possible lives for anyone affected with these conditions. So I'll come back and just start to invite each of our panelists to share their recommendations, their lessons learned, their experience in this international dialogue that for the National Health Council is such an important focus, and one I think that we could develop even further. So Cindy, let me turn to you first and share some of the things that got me so excited about even having this forum in the first place.
Well, it's great to be with you, and thanks, Randy, for inviting me to do this session with you. When we were talking about what to do and what to talk about, there's so much to talk about internationally, and so I thought I'd start from the beginning, if you'd like me to start from the beginning, and really focus on an area on curing MS, which is a big part of our mission. We will cure MS while empowering people affected by MS to live their best lives. The National Multiple Sclerosis Society started with Sylvia Lowry, a 26-year-old sister of Bernard, pictured here. Bernard was diagnosed with MS when she placed a personal ad in the New York Times, and she sparked a global movement. That 1945 ad read, "Multiple sclerosis. Will anyone recovered from it please communicate with patient?" Sylvia Lowry, as I called her, and I knew Ms. Lowry, formed the National MS Society and then funded its first research project in 1946. So if you can just imagine, 26 years old, she places an ad, she gets responses, about 55 responses or so, and she starts a global movement. In the late 1960s, Ms. Lowry then founded the MS International Federation. And her mantra was always, it doesn't matter where in the world a cure is found, as long as it's available to everyone. And this idea and this concept has stayed with us for the getting close to 80 years of the National MS Society. It might be interesting to note, based on Donna's comment earlier, that the International Federation was founded in New York at the time. It was right in Midtown Manhattan, which was where Ms. Lowry lived, and she moved it shortly to the UK, to London, which is where it resides today. And I think that is hard to have a global movement located in the US. It's kind of an interesting way to think about what our role is. So today in MS, after close to 80 years, we have faster diagnosis. There are many treatments now for MS that slow the progression. There's much greater awareness of the disease and understanding, and we have a passionate and supportive global community. The National MS Society has been the driving force of all of this progress. And there have been more advances in MS than have been achieved in any other neurological disease. And that all started with Sylvia Lowry and her brother, Bernard. This whole person-centric approach to the organization has been very important, even as the global organization continues to evolve. So in trying to describe sort of the international components, I just picked one area of research. There are lots of other examples I could have chosen, but the Society has, because of Ms. Lowry, a history of international research funding. And it started, as I said, in our roots. Our current portfolio includes funding throughout the world, and it includes strategic collaborative efforts in several countries. So you can see some of those here. Collaborative efforts are we have long-standing collaborative efforts, and the Society in the U.S. is often provides the leadership for many of these international pursuits. The International Advisory Committee on Clinical Trials in MS dates back to the late 1980s and continues to be instrumental in defining the variabilities in MS, the diagnosis criteria, and more. In fact, they published a paper just a few weeks ago that is cutting edge, and we have a communications plan to really work through the change management in how that is going to affect clinical trials, FDA approval, understanding of MS throughout the world. And we've also connected the largest prize for innovation in MS research. It's called the Barancik Prize. That's given by the Society. It's a $100,000 prize to a researcher to use as that person sees fit. It's highlighted at an annual conference at ACTRIMS, which is one of the many TRIMS organizations. They're throughout the whole world. This is one is the Americas Committee for Treatment and Research in MS, and we have relationships with most of the TRIMS organizations throughout the U.S., throughout the world, I should say. And this relationship is a demonstration of the influence and regard of the society. So when at the ACTRIMS conference, you can see the National MS Society logo everywhere. Their premier lecture is the Barancik Prize lecture that is obviously jointly conducted with the National MS Society. And it speaks to the National MS Society has advanced the careers of about 1,100 researchers who have been behind nearly every major breakthrough and treatment in MS. So many of the society trained researchers have mentored professionals throughout the world. And so it's just really heartwarming to hear people reference those connections as you hear researchers talk about their why they stay in the career of multiple sclerosis. The investments and collaborations made internationally for decades positioned the National MS Society to provide the backbone leadership to achieve collective impact through the International Progressive MS Alliance, which was launched in 2013 and continues to grow. Addressing a crucial unmet need in MS research and treatment, the Alliance, the Progressive MS Alliance, directs investments from 20 countries right now. And it's important to note that a pivotal moment in forming of the International Progressive MS Alliance was when we in the United States recognized our contributions toward MS research from private organizations, from other MS organizations around the world, total about half of the total research investments. So the United States is by far the largest leader in funding MS research from private organizations worldwide. Therefore, when we were forming this alliance and trying to gain the trust and confidence of other countries to join us, we made that declaration that we promised to fund at least half of the alliance's work. Will you join us? Was essentially our pitch. And from then we have 20 countries that have joined us. So in this slide, you can see many of the connections stemming from our membership on the MS International Federation, the biggest and most important being the Alliance. And this Progressive MS Alliance, if you just think about the scope of it, about 17 staff and volunteers from the US, from the United States, provide in-kind support to the Alliance. And we have 5.5 full-time equivalent professionals that are funded by the Alliance that are all from the United States and are part of our US organization. So the Alliance was not a separate organization. We decided not to do that, but there was trust and confidence worldwide that the United States could manage that and be the backbone organization. It's called the lead agency, is what we describe it with the MS International Federation. And this, so you imagine a 17 staff from the US combined with about 40 staff and volunteers from throughout the world, and how we are able to leverage and amplify our commitment. So all of this engagement that we got culminated in an opportunity to provide leadership in the development and gaining of international consensus on pathways to cures. So what we started with collaboration in MS research in a very specific part of MS, progressive MS. You might know that there's relapsing remitting MS, for which there are many treatments, and progressive MS, for which there's a dearth of treatments. So we knew this unmet need. We brought the world together to focus on it. And that leveraged us to say, okay, we're ready now to figure out what it would take to provide MS cures. And so in the US, we started putting together the scientists and brought in people from thought leaders from throughout the world to put together this roadmap. And the Pathways to Cures research roadmap started with a concept meeting. You can see the history of it in 2018, when the National MS Society's Board of Directors and our Research Programs Advisory Committee came together to figure out what it would take, what it would look like to identify MS cures. And it's relevant that we have an S at the end of cure, because there's more than one cure. When we talk to people affected by MS, what does a cure mean to them? They have various definitions, which we were able to describe and categorize, and then figure out what do we need science-wise to achieve and to solve for those cures. The roadmap was developed with lots of dozens of MS scientific experts and hundreds of people living with MS weighing in, describing what a cure meant to them. And the plan was published in March 2022 in the MS Journal, which is the most widely read MS-specific journal in the world. And this, of course, is a peer-reviewed journal. So this was a really monumental opportunity where we're publishing the plan to achieve MS cures. 30 MS organizations, including all of the major research funding MS organizations and all of the MS professional research organizations worldwide, have endorsed the roadmap as the path forward to reach MS cures. So then people asked me, Cindy, how are you going to declare consensus? I declare consensus when we have an agreement from all of the thought leaders throughout the world that say this is the path forward to cure MS. And this graph just gives you, this is on the front page of the journal, and we're so proud that the journal used our artwork in that issue of the journal. This graphic depicts the concept for the evolution, the natural history of MS over time, and where on this timeline the stop, restore, and end pathways are most relevant. So this just gives you a sense of what we need to do, and the overall description of our plan to cure MS. We focus, there are actually 2 pathways within each one of these. So we have 6 total. There's 2 in stop, restore, and end. So that's the science behind it. I encourage you, if you're interested, to read this article, which is not as accessible as maybe other articles that I could provide you, but let me know if you'd like to know more. So in summary, I just want to talk about where we're going next, and what the pivotal moments were for really bringing the world together to establish global collaboration in achieving a world free of MS. So as I mentioned, in 1946, we had a founder who cared deeply and devoted her life to solving multiple sclerosis because she had a family member. She committed first right away to international funding and early career support for scientists. That has built tremendous capacity in giving us influence throughout the world, and people trusting us, but also in making connections throughout the world with these early career support scientists that we maintain and connect with throughout their careers, keep them in the MS field, and they mentor others. So it's a very tight community of MS researchers and clinicians, and the National MS Society plays that role of keeping them together and connected. And then Sylvia Lowery founded the MS International Federation, starting in New York and then moving it to London. And she engaged in and lead global efforts throughout the world, identifying intersections for collaboration, including the impressive Clinical Trials Committee and we're very strong leaders in the MS International Federation Board of Trustees. So there are 3 members from the US, including I, serve on the Board of Trustees with the MS International Federation. Very important work, and I'll say lots of challenges working internationally, but I would just venture to say that it's worth it. In 2013, we leveraged all of our influence and formed the International Progressive MS Alliance, bringing together 20 countries to focus on the progressive forms of MS. And then we said we can do it for progressive MS. We're ready. The science is ready. Let's define the roadmap to MS cures. What's the plan to cure MS, and what do we need to do that? We know that we can do it better together. So gaining international consensus from the beginning, from the concept of putting together that plan to cure MS, we knew we wanted to have international consensus, that would help us expedite progress overall. And now, just a few weeks ago, we held a Pathways to Cures Global Summit, which was the first meeting a little bit more than a year after we published the plan to cure MS. We knew at that time we wanted to have a global summit to keep the momentum going, to say, what's the progress we've made and what are the very most important next steps. So that Pathways to Cures Global Summit occurred just the first week in May. And we had people from over 18 countries were involved in that summit. 200 thought leaders came together in New York City. Powerful time. People with MS were involved. Major donors joined. We have major investors who are working in this work, and they all contributed toward an amazing scientific review. And from there, the pathways, we will be developing the Pathways to Cure Global Research Framework. So again, led by the United States, we have the organizations from around the world, their scientific leaders on staff of MS organizations coming together to not just share what they funded in MS research throughout the world and what their results were, but aligning their funding to the Pathways to Cures roadmap using the same nomenclature so that we can communicate with each other in real time and throughout, and getting to that point where we can say, what are our plans for funding? What can we collaborate on earlier? How can we work together to get the best progress out of each one of the research projects that we fund? And so it's not combining our money this time like we did with the Alliance, but it's aligning our strategy and our funding so along the Pathways to Cures roadmap so that we can accelerate our progress overall. So I hope I stayed within my time, and I'm so excited. And thank you so much for giving me this space. And I encourage you all to be involved. It starts with one step internationally, and there's so far you can go.
Wow, Cindy, that is so impressive. And I just like, there's aspiration, there's inspiration, also very concrete. I mean, to have a plan, to have the endorsement by so many key players that align with that is just really, I think, a great roadmap for all of us as we think from whatever the starting point might be. How can we do more for patients globally, knowing what we do from here in the United States? What's our leadership role? And I think you really provided something very specific for us to be able to take forward. I think we can take one question and then, we'll go to our next speakers. I'm sensitive to time, but this is such a rich conversation. Kalanit Balas at ALS Association had a question that popped up right away. So I don't know if she was anticipating your presentation, Cindy, if she was responding to Donna, but Kalanit, why don't you come off the, become visible and come off mute and just share your question and before we go to our next speaker.
Thanks, Randy. I was actually, hi, Cindy, it was great to see your presentation. As you know, I chair the International Alliance also for ALS, and there's a lot of synergy. I'm so excited for your presentation. I'm like, ooh, I want to grab that. My question was actually in response to Donna, and I was asking, but I'm open to response from you as well, because I think we've talked about this a little bit, is that staff structure. Cindy, you alluded to it, the 5.5 full-time people, and then, kind of the volunteer background. Donna, I was kind of curious, given the work that you're doing, I was kind of curious on that infrastructure and resourcing, because when I look at with the efforts that Cindy just made, those are some of the things we're talking about internationally. But as we all know, we all only have so much bandwidth. So that was kind of where my question was coming from.
I'm happy to answer it at least quickly. If we had gotten to the challenges part, that has been the most challenging thing about learning the rules and regulations of hiring in different countries, recognizing and budgeting for the extra expenses because of larger social welfare systems, for example, in the EU, and so. So we do budget differently, and it has played a role into the selection of countries now that we have some experience, and we are starting to explore, since we have enough scale, some sort of HR companies that do that work for us. In several countries. But at first it was just me standing in line at the DC office with my notarized Italian papers to start that first office.
Well, I'll just say that we keep everything, all of our leadership and staffing is in the US. Right. So that's how we started, and we leverage those organizations. So their staff, so we're not combining the staffs around that. So, but when we named, I named a vice president of global initiatives, that's kind of like the one position. Otherwise it's pieces of, including me, pieces of people coming together. So we have 5.5 staff that are part of the Alliance. They're funded by the Alliance. So that's the pooled money, but they are all US based, which does makes it's a hurdle that I don't have to go over like Donna does. Yeah. And then the other MS organizations take care of their own HR. So it's a thing.
It is a thing. It is a thing.
Well,
I have a ton more questions, but I'll stop.
Thanks for jumping. No, it's really helpful. Thanks for jumping in, Kalani, because this is a dialogue. It's a discovery, conversation as much as anything. So with that, let's go to you, Julia, because I know you've been very active in this space, and please share your perspective.
Thanks for having this conversation today. I'm very excited about it. We are really new into this space, and we're tiptoeing into the space, as I say. So the Every Life Foundation is a policy and advocacy organization, and we are just turning 15 years old next year. So we started with a very small policy agenda to improve the development and regulatory process for rare diseases. We've expanded our scope and mission into diagnostics, newborn screening, access, and really, built out federal policy and now state policy. And now we're looking at, how can we tiptoe and learn about what's going on in the global ecosystem for drug development. So, our organization's name is the Every Life Foundation. We sit down and think about it. We're not the Every American Foundation. Right. So even in our name, it has a global mission. But really, with the ultra rare community, solving for our ultra rare populations, being able to treat patients in other countries will be really important for an industry partner to even consider developing a treatment for these small patient populations. So, that global ecosystem is really important to getting patients in the US treated. But again, it is really a global issue when it comes to ultra rare, and I'm sure Pat will talk a little bit more about the amazing work she's done globally. So really what we've looked at, access outside of the US, the Pharma recently issued a global access report. It was access for rare in the US is hard, but outside of the US, it's even harder. And so what does that mean for innovation for the rare disease community? That really puts a ton of pressure on the US payers and really makes our populations much smaller than they need to be. And also for many rare diseases, trials will need to happen outside of the US in order to even get enough patients to fulfill the trials. So understanding the regulatory challenges outside of the US and the regulatory agencies outside of the US is really important for drug development in general. So how did we start? This is, I say tiptoeing because it's really easy to get pulled quickly into a bigger space. And we have to be really mindful about our capacity as an organization. And we don't want to lose focus on the impact that we're having in US federal policy. And we're still in the early stages of really, launching robust state level policy and advocacy. We've, passed legislation in 10 states for newborn screening. And we have, we started having state houses events, but even finding sustainable funding for those programs has been challenging. And when you look globally, you know, the United States is tiny compared to the need outside of the US. So really what we looked at in the very beginning is how can we partner? Who is out there that is interested and aligned with the work that we're doing in the US? So one of our big core principles is empowering patients to actually have a voice in public policy, making sure that they're, you know, have the resources to travel, that they're aware of events, creating the opportunities to be heard. So our first partnership was an organization called Eurydice, and they are the kind of European Federation of Rare Disease Organizations. And they actually came to us and they said, we want to host your Rare Disease Week on Capitol Hill, but in the EU. So actually bring patients to lobby Parliament, which is not something that is typically done in Europe as it is done in the United States. You know, every patient organization brings their patients to DC to lobby. That is very common. Parliament is very different, where they're not actually representing individual countries, they're representing the party within those countries. So it's not the direct constituent asks. But we were really excited that Eurydice was really interested in giving patients a voice in public policy, not just being the patient voice. And so, you know, we partnered with them having, you know, I went over there to meet with their team to talk about what we did. They sent a staffer over to participate in Rare Disease Week on Capitol Hill, so that they could see how we run it. We gave them all of our materials, examples of our webinars, so that was really giving them all the tools and resources. And then we provided a base amount of funding for them, because in Parliament, if you are funded by the biopharmaceutical companies, you can't get those meetings with Parliament like you can here in DC. So that non-industry funding was really important for them to be able to launch this program and bring patients together. So we had 44 patients join for their very first Rare Disease Week in Brussels this February. So we were really excited and got to meet the patients, and they were just so excited and appreciative. I saw the comment before about, you know, is there concern about, you know, US influence? But really what I saw from these patient communities, they were so eager to learn best practices. They don't care where the best practices come from. They want to share, they want to learn, they want to use whatever can work to help their communities and in their own countries. You know, we've also started to engage with another more global organization that works around patient engagement. And I am leaving for Italy next week to go to the Patient Engagement Open Forum, and really excited to participate in, this will be kind of my first international event. So we are brand new into this space, really looking to listen and learn and figure out what the need is. The other thing that we've started to do is really gathering data from our patient organization members. We have a program called Community Congress, where we bring both our industry partners and our patient organizations together to solve policy issues. And it's important for us to listen to those patient communities. Are they serving global patient populations? Are they engaging internationally? And if our members are engaging internationally, then that is another reason for us to really think about how we can better serve our own members in that area. Can we educate them around you know, what's going on in other countries? And rare diseases is so complicated because there is not a single definition of rare diseases that is standard across countries. In the EU, they define it differently. In Canada, there isn't even a legal definition at all. They don't have an Orphan Drug Act. In Latin America, different countries have different definitions. And so what does that mean for drug development if we can't even as a global community define what it means to have a rare disease? Right. There's also a really important time right now. The EU is actually reauthorizing their orphan drug bill. So it's called the OMP, Orphan Medical Products Legislation. The draft was just released. Parliament elections are coming up. So, you know, there's time. It's not something that's going to be rushed through like they do here in the US Congress. It's not expiring. So there's really opportunity for patients to really engage in this over the next couple of years. But I think their timeline is looking for 2025, and Yordis is planning to bring patients back to Parliament next year to continue these discussions. But one of the big things they're calling for that doesn't exist in that legislation yet is a single market for pharmaceuticals in the EU, because it's so challenging the way that these very small patient populations just cannot get access to drugs, because companies aren't going to go into those different countries and launch the drugs. So, what do we need to do to educate patients about the bill? Is this something our patient community is interested in? And I see the time is ending soon, so I will just get to the end of my presentation so we can hear from other people. But one of the things, we're just trying to learn the players, like who are the major patient organizations, who are the good players, who are the bad players, because who are the people who want to be collaborative. One of the big challenges that we have in the rare disease international organizations, they're really focused on universal healthcare. As a US-based organization, that is a third rail of politics that no one wants to touch here. I used to be a universal healthcare lobbyist. We don't tell people that anymore, but I was in California. I'm for states experimenting with that, as states should experiment with policies. But federally, that makes it really challenging for us to engage in those international policy discussions. But there really is a ton of opportunity for patients to engage. The patients were really excited to meet with us. They wanted to learn about what we were doing. They wanted our support. Travel is expensive. Time zones are hard. But I think there's also lots of opportunities with the DEI efforts that patient communities are making here in the US, translating materials. What can we do to make sure that those translated materials might actually work for non-US based communities? So I will wrap it up with that.
Well, thank you, Julia. I just love when you dip your toe into these topics, because you had so many great insights to share, and it really is a journey for all of us. And so thank you for capturing all the different aspects that your organization has been attempting to address, has surfaced. I think your participation in the Patient Engagement Open Forum next in a couple of weeks, not even, will be really valuable in that space. So thank you for that, and stay with us, because I think this conversation can build from what you just shared. I know there'll be some questions for you as well. With that, let me go to Pat, because Pat also has been very active in this space. And really, when I think about the research journey, Pat, you just really got me very excited, energized about all the good work you've been doing. And so please share.
Well, thank you, Randy, and thank you for inviting me to this discussion. It's one that's so important to all of us. And I have to say that I represent PPMD, or Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, and we're focused on a rare disease called Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which is basically encompassed several, which is female carriers, Becker muscular dystrophy, and Duchenne. This is a progressive disease. The mean age of diagnosis is around 5 years old, and it progresses over time, where usually, because it's X-linked, it's primarily boys, will lose the ability to walk in their early teens, lose the ability to lift hand to mouth in their later teens, and then need ventilation to survive. Mean age of death is around 35 years old. So all of that is very interesting. And when we started, we thought, now how hard can it be? We'll just make sure that every child in the world is diagnosed appropriately, has appropriate care, and then access to therapies in development. I think that was sort of a delusion of grandeur when we started, and we went over to Europe and met with people who had children diagnosed with Duchenne in Italy, France, Germany, the Netherlands, and we all had the same view: this will be easy. Well, it turns out, because we didn't even know what to do in our own country, and they didn't know what to do in their country, that the whole concept of being at least international, let alone global, was really not a good concept. So at the time, we started a small organization that was suggested to be international when we were ready. And it took about 10 years, I think, for all of us to really understand our own countries, what resources were available, what opportunities would be available. In the United States, we did several things. One is we began investing in research. In basic science, to really begin to characterize this disease. We had the gene was cloned, the protein product was known, and then we really had to characterize, so what is happening based on the absence of that protein. We also felt that policy was important because in any rare disease that affects in Duchenne 14,000 around in this country, 250,000 worldwide, we could not possibly raise sufficient money to get therapy development, or for that matter, industry interested, even though there were policies that would incentivize them to develop drugs. But we didn't have a disease well characterized sufficiently that there would be interest. That led us to invest in the ability to create policy, write laws, make friends in Congress. And that led to the passage of the Muscular Dystrophy Care Act in 2001. I think for us in the United States, that was a tipping point of investment, because from then until now, that piece of legislation led to about a $900 million investment in heart disease. So that, as you might imagine, then really brought industry on board to say, we can develop therapies. So if we look at what happened in addition to the investment in industry becoming interested, the Center for Disease Control, along with all of our experts in the US, developed what we call care considerations, or standards of care. So with that tool in place of standard of care and a way to diagnose, genetic testing became available. Then I think we decided we could reach out internationally. So we went back to our European friends, who by that time had learned about their countries, their policies, what they could do. And so we had these groups of people starting up in Eastern and Western Europe. We really felt like, okay, this is an opportunity for us. And then we solidified the World Duchenne Organization. So World Duchenne Organization is an organization that is basically a group of other organizations that are now in about 46 countries. And we come together once a year to discuss needs. How do we diagnose appropriately? Is newborn screening a reasonable alternative or reasonable opportunity within their own country? We, PPMD, have just resubmitted to the RUSP, and this is expected to go under review while we also work on a state basis. We also share equally all of our tools. So whatever educational resources we have, people can, we usually say in rare disease, you beg, borrow, and steal. And we can steal as long as they translate and are really set up in their own countries to expand these tools that are available to them. We have a certified Duchenne Care Center program in that we certify centers in the United States to assure parents and their families, or patients and their families, that they're receiving optimal care according to the published standards. We then, in World Duchenne Organization, created a very similar opportunity for the European reference networks, so they can use that certification plan and process to then think about how do we really disseminate this care. And so we feel like we're making progress in terms of trying to get diagnosis, genetic testing, opportunities to access optimal care. But then we come to this issue of, in the United States, we are so really lucky to have 46 companies looking at trying to restore missing protein through gene therapy or through antisense oligonucleotides and other more technologies that are still preclinical, and then looking at what happens because of the absence of this protein in terms of inflammation and the whole downstream process. But then how do you think about, and how can we encourage companies to go outside the US? And they certainly do want to be global, but how is it? And how do they learn about these other countries, what the rules and regulations are, what the opportunities are, how many patients exist, how could they recruit? So what we formed with, and Julia mentioned Uordis, we went to Uordis because they too serve this population, and they have in Uordis with the CF Foundation established what they call Community Advisory Board. So the Community Advisory Board, as developed by Uordis, really is a group of individuals from various places in the world that come together, and companies come to present their protocols, their interest in developing a therapy, their informed consent, their burden on patients. And so we've formed this Community Advisory Board, and I'm the chair. We have now 14 countries, Eastern and Western Europe and Israel. We have reached into Asia, although India, as you know, is a healthcare system that is very, maybe non-existent, but certainly very complicated and complex about who has access. So we're trying to work in India and certainly the Asian countries as well. But in the Community Advisory Board, companies will come and spend about 4 hours with this group of individuals. Again, Eastern, Western Europe, Australia, Israel. And we sit down and talk about, what does this protocol look like? What are their dreams about the future? What happens next? We ask questions about burden. We think about, who are you recruiting? Because as we look at the trajectory of this disease, as you might imagine, many countries think about an ambulatory patient population when more than half of our population is non-ambulatory. So we can incentivize them by saying we can help recruiting. We all have registries. We in the US have the largest registry in the world, actually, with 5,000 patients, but there are other registries that we are agreed upon to collect common data elements so that we can really look very clearly and say who we could recruit, how fast we could recruit, what sites would be amenable to think about for holding a clinical trial in those sites. We can introduce them to various physicians in those sites. So it's a very nice bi-directional communication with companies so that we can, our thought is to make sure that all children have access to diagnosis, optimal care, and the ability to participate in clinical trials. The access issue, as Julia mentioned, is a hard one because of all of the different healthcare, to include HART in this country as well. So we're trying to look at this issue together and think through how can we enable or enhance or expand the opportunity for access for some of these therapies that are coming online. We fundamentally would love to change regulatory policy, and hopefully there's no FDA and EMA people on this call, but it is painful and heartbreaking to see an approval in the US and know that it might be years later in other countries. Sure. Because time is everything in rare diseases. And if we could think through how to work with the regulators in each of those countries to think through how can we serve both of their processes, their policies, what their requirements are for approval, whether it's functional or a surrogate, how can we deliver therapies to these children in time so that they have longer lives, functional lives, and they can be serving their own countries. So we try to look internationally all of the time. We still have major issues in trying to get a diagnosis in sub-Saharan Africa. So we do know the difficult areas. And then one recommendation we had for an international meeting that's held every year, it's called the World Muscle Society meeting, and I think this is for all international meetings that occur this way. It seems to me that when you put them in places where there is huge unmet need, like sub-Saharan Africa, like some of the South American countries, that creates this synergy among the people that are there and among the people who might treat those patients. So our next effort is to really place some of these major meetings in places where we think we need to make inroads into areas where we don't know the policy, we don't know who the people are, but we feel like that could attract them to change the world in Duchenne. So that's our goal. And we continue to be international to the extent that we can, and then we try to force the issue.
Spoken like a true advocate and with passion. Also, what I hear, though, is some real concrete lessons learned, pathways forward, methodologies, collaborations that are working, and then also a call to action on how much more we might be able to do within the specific condition, but then generally. So Pat, thank you so much for your leadership in this space, and we'll continue this conversation today and going forward. So we'll finish our panel with Selena Gore. Selena, you've got a broad background in the international arena, which, as you're listening to your colleagues, and clearly working shoulder to shoulder in the women's heart space, I'm curious about what you're hearing, what we should be thinking about as we continue this dialogue. So please share.
Thanks you so much, Randy, and thank you to my fellow panelists. I feel like for Women Heart to go last is really appropriate because we've heard a lot about the rare disease space, where I get that there is real value in aggregating beyond just the US, right? And bringing these experiences together so that you turn something that is rare a little bit less rare, because now you're sort of compiling stories, many more stories than you might otherwise get. Well, in heart disease, we don't have the issue of rarity, because this is easily the most common disease that folks around the world are dealing with. But where Women Heart comes in to consider the commonality or what we do want to aggregate beyond the US is that there are certain heart disease diagnoses that are more difficult to get diagnosed than others. And that's where we really try to focus in. And the way that we do that isn't to think about expansion to other countries, but it is really to think about what infrastructure already exists in other countries in terms of the provision of support to women with heart disease, and women trying to get a heart disease diagnosis. And that serves us well. We are considered to be the leading heart disease organization focused on women in the world, despite the fact that our focus is here in the US. So the way we approach it is that our international work is really on the basis of invitations from organizations seeking our support. And seeking to learn from us and link into us. There are a number of organizations in other countries that, again, bring together women who have experienced heart disease. But the way that we do it, so we provide support, education, and advocacy, and that trio of priorities is something that other organizations globally come to us to learn about. And in particular, they've heard a lot, can you hear the helicopter above? They are really focusing on our women heart champions, who are women with heart disease, who we turn into super patients, is what I like to call them. They get trained at the Mayo Clinic, and they go back into their communities to provide support to newly diagnosed women with heart disease. And organizations like the Global Heart Hub out of Ireland, who bring together patient advocacy organizations in the cardiovascular space, invite Women Heart on a regular basis to provide that, the patient experience, again, not from the perspective of it being not a common experience, but from the perspective of the different experience, or the more unique experiences that women face and the challenges that women face in getting a diagnosis. We also participate on international patient advisory boards that I'm sure a number of you also participate on. And that comes from the pharmaceutical world and a lot of whom are our funders. And we participate as well when we're invited to speak at international conferences. The idea is, our focus is a lot less on research and a lot more on the mechanisms to provide that support and to connect patients to one another, so that they feel a lot less alone, a lot less that their experience is a singular experience. And we also think about this interaction outside of the US with a lens of equity. It is really easy for us to focus on the countries that are, let's say, most similar to the US, but we know that the greatest need are probably in the countries that are the least similar to the US. So we really think about that, and make efforts to reach out to folks who are challenged by this lack of bringing patients together. And so, in sort of to bring it back to Women Hearts thinking about how to engage internationally, really the thing that drives us is when we are invited by organizations to participate. Now, one of the blessings of the pandemic was that we took our programming virtual, which means that women outside of the US could easily access our support. And so we've seen that as well, that there has been increased demand from women outside of the US, and we're not about to say no. And so as a consequence, we are starting to think about how we can little by little provide that support to non-US based women. But I would say, our aspirations are not are not global. Our aspirations are really focused on where the demand sort of pulls us. And you'll see that in the next couple of years, that we will really be thinking a lot more about how to make ourselves be better known, so that we can see exactly where those pockets of need are and how we can meet them.
Selena, that's really great. I just hear from your perspective, just calling out what's different and what's the same in terms of what we might take forward. I'm a true believer in anything that's done internationally as a global knowledge exchange. No matter what the development level of your country, the resource, whatever, everybody always learns from each other to the greater good, which is just wonderful. And I appreciate your, experience in the international arena, the systems of international government, and the ways in which the international community thinks about health and thinks about how to be supportive of groups like ours, be they US based or collaborative, with organizations internationally. So I can't thank our panelists enough, Donna, Cindy, Pat, Selena, Julia, just amazing insights that you shared that take us down the path of, what have our organizations learned? How have our organizations responded to the fact that patients really exist globally and we have a common set of issues that we can address together? How does that touch on our roles relative to research and innovation, patient empowerment and engagement, models and recommendations for policymakers that are going to advance, all of our interests that we all share? So with that, I'm going to have us take a 5-minute break, and I would encourage you to take advantage of our 1-minute stretch and meditation moment so that we can come back fresh. We've got Lisa Butler from Guillain-Barré CIPD, who will be moderating, sharing from her own experience, and then moderating an open discussion about everything we've heard and where do we go from here, kind of collectively and kind of self-serving. Where would you like the National Health Council to be supportive of where we go from here? So definitely put your questions in the Q&A. Lisa will be responding to those questions. And for right now, let's take a 5-minute break. We'll be back at 2:16 Eastern time, and we'll get started with that second half of this really, really important and worthwhile conversation. So thank you so much to our speakers. Thank you so much for everyone who's participating today. Well, welcome back, everyone. It's great to have had a few minutes stretch. I'm just so amazed at everything we've heard. I shouldn't be, because we've got amazing colleagues who do such incredible work every day, but hearing people share as our panelists did about, their experiences within their organizations to really reach out and support a global patient population and patient groups across the world is just really, really inspiring. And to have such a rich level of experience and accomplishment already is just really gives me hope that we can do an awful lot together that'll be important to patients, their families, their family caregivers. So that we're back and stretched, let's get started with a really important part of our program, and that's to have the discussion, the conversation about what we've heard and where we can go with this International Patient Forum and this conversation among, but also beyond the National Health Council membership about patients, issues that are occurring globally that affect patients, and our role in assuring that patients are informed, engaged, and influential in supporting their health. So I'm very, very pleased to introduce my partner for this part of the program, who's Lisa Butler. And she's president and CEO of GBS CIPD, and as a board member for the National Health Council. Now, for the next 30 minutes, she'll moderate this conversation, and I think it'll be really incredible for us to hear from her own perspective, her own experience in this space and her organization, but then also to have her good moderating skills in helping us then draw and understand where we might go from here. So it's interesting, Lisa first learned about the foundation in 1992 when her father-in-law was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome. And so 10 years later, Lisa's son, Stuart, was also diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome. And following Stuart's recovery, Lisa became a parent liaison at the Foundation for Parents and Children Diagnosed with GBS. She has been an amazing colleague to me, a leader within the National Health Council and our patient community. And I don't think we could do any better than to ask Lisa to really help facilitate where we go next with what we've been hearing and what we might discover from the questions and comments of our many participants today. So Lisa, I'd really like to know, about your organization. You're active in the international arena. What's that experience been like? Did you hear some commonalities in what we heard from our panelists earlier, and what insights might you share to kind of kick things off?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Randy, and thank you to National Health Council for once again, identifying, I think, a topic that has great and broad interest. And wow, thank you so much to the speakers that we already heard from. I think it just speaks so loudly that there are so many different ways that we can approach this global expansion, right, and our international presence, from, Cindy talking about global research, and Pat talking about the community advisory boards, and Julia talking about using alliances and Eurotis, and Selena, really distinguishing between rare disease and then sort of the common, more broad diseases, and commenting on the commonality of approaches with support, education, and advocacy. I think it just speaks volumes that we share so much in common, and that, we can do so much together. But I really appreciate the different perspectives that everybody shared. So thanks, Randy. As you mentioned, we are, in our name, we are the GBS CIDP Foundation International. So what does that mean for us? I'll just share a little bit about what that means for us. But as Randy said, this is really a time where we want to hear from you. So I'll share a little bit, and then please, unmute yourself, let us see you and hear your thoughts. Some of the questions that we heard earlier about bandwidth and staff, both US and internationally. How do you sort of bridge that? That's something we're struggling with too. So I think that was a great question, Kalanit. But we traditionally have relied very heavily on our volunteers as our global presence. So we feel that where we have volunteers, then we encourage them to create community where they are. So we've looked at the world in kind of 4 quadrants. So we look at it 4 different ways. We try to anyway. So we have sort of US, Canada, Asia Pacific, and then Latin South America. So again, trying to engage the volunteers and trying just to share the resources that we have, all the educational material, all the knowledge. Our Medical Scientific Advisory Board is very global. So our Centers of Excellence program is very global. So how do we make all of those resources more readily available to all of these folks? And I think it's challenging, as we've heard, because the governance is so different everywhere we go, but we're really trying to use our volunteers. So what we did recently, we launched what we're calling a global listening tour. Sounds very official. But we started in Europe, and we, through industry support, we had a facilitated conversation with 6 different volunteers in the EU to talk about what their unmet needs were. Not surprisingly, a lot of it is around access, around knowledge of therapies. Again, we're in rare disease, so there also seems to be a real gap in employer understanding. So again, this is our global listening tour kickoff in the EU, and we're hoping to do the same, likely virtually, in Asia Pacific and then in Latin South America. So I think, this all, hearing from our speakers earlier and maybe sort of our approach is, I'm very interested to hear from our viewers, how do you define success internationally? What have you done? Or examples can you share with us, more examples, questions for any of us? So please feel free to unmute yourself, put some questions in the chat. We would love to hear from you. And as Randy said, we want to take all these learnings and apply them to the program we'll have in the fall, and really continue to dive deep in this area. So Randy, do we have any questions at this point?
I'm not seeing any new questions, so I would encourage people, put your question in the Q&A, or just kind of come off, come on screen and off mute to just go ahead and put your questions out there, because this really is a dialogue. I know one conversation I've had with some of our colleagues who, like all of you, are kind of looked to as resources globally, even though your focus may be national or US based. And I know the Psoriasis Foundation, I'm not sure if Jason has a comment, but I know in talking to Leah, mentioned, I think up to 20% of the people coming to their website are actually coming from outside of the United States. I know the Epilepsy Foundation has similar experiences. Jason, you just came on, so when I give you a shout out like that, I guess you were stuck. But can you comment on that? Just what kind of traffic you have from beyond the US and how you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a patient navigation center, which allows for folks to email, text, call, and actually we get a lot of emails and texts. So almost 80% of questions come in that way. So it's not as much of a call center anymore, but about 10 to 20% come from outside the US, a bunch from Australia, some from Europe, and certainly have had, kind of everywhere around the world, if you will. And I think, what we do there is we try to get them the best answers they can, or connect them with a patient organization that is in their country. And I think, one of the understanding a few of the dynamics between kind of the work we do here in the US as patient organizations versus externally is some of the funding, right? We're all strapped for cash, but even more so over there. And there's different rules and regulations beyond how they can get funding. So I think it's important for us to be able to provide those types of education materials. Actually, when I was at I worked at the Lupus Foundation of America. One thing we did there, shout out to them and all the work they're doing, is just letting folks use the materials, translate them to like 8 to 10 different languages, and just, no need to recreate the wheel if we have those resources. Appreciated Cindy's comments about sort of everyone speaking from the same playbook, if you will, and that's really important. And then I would just note too, we've, and I'm curious what folks think here. I wasn't at MPF when this happened, but MPF, through some of one of the international bodies that works in psoriatic disease, we have a good partnership with, was able to get psoriasis recognized within the WHO as a disease to look out for. And so I'm curious if folks have had success with that, or even, what has the direct impact been if WHO does recognize you? Like, are there kind of things you can point to from outcomes? Because I've always been very curious about that since seeing it. And I think I'll stop there.
Well, thanks for those comments and also that question. Any of our panelists or any participants want to respond to Jason's question about WHO?
This is Cindy, Randy. I'll comment, and only to put a wrench in the works around WHO. It's not that easy. It's about, with our healthcare system and the variability of healthcare systems around the world. The MS International Federation has, for its second time, submitted an essential medicines list, which is a very big step for us to do and comes with all kinds of challenges. So in the United States, all therapies, and there are almost 30 approved therapies for multiple sclerosis right now, and those are all approved and available in the United States with problems associated with that, the high cost and all that kind of thing. So with problems, there's not 30 in other countries, depending on how their health system works. And in some countries, there's no therapies available for MS. And MS is considered, there's about 2.8 million people worldwide, about 1 million people in the United States with MS, and it's considered in some places a rare disease. The MS International Federation has worked on putting together an essential medicines list. You can put in 3 medicines to say there's got to be something available for people with multiple sclerosis wherever they're diagnosed. It's an enormous process. When you have so many therapies that are already available, the pharmaceutical companies are not going to be happy because you pick 3 therapies. So there's that whole kind of space to maneuver. And then also there's an off-label therapy that that it does make sense to include, and we're part of the decision-making process that is on the list because it's available in countries. It is just such a big, and I think it might be approved this time around. So we've done it twice. Very exciting. We'll make access more available and some therapy available throughout the world for people, more likely. I mean, they still have to act on it. Not everybody cares what the World Health Organization thinks, so there's just, it's progress, and there are landmines. And for us, the landmines have to do with pharmaceutical partner relationships and access to the United States, because we don't want, of course, insurance companies to use World Health Organization minimal access to impede access that we have in the United States. So it's just, lots of things to think about.
Thank you, Cindy. Jason, I'll jump in a little bit. We sort of opposite through industry have been introduced to a department at the UN called UNITAR, which is the UN Department for Training and Research. And they are interested in doing some awareness for our community takes plasma products. So they've brought that to us, and they're rolling this out in a couple of different underserved communities, sort of low income, marginalized areas and around the country. And that's been a real opportunity for us. So UN, not WHO, but still helpful to have that kind of larger perspective. But I want to get to Amanda. You have your hand raised there. Can you unmute yourself and share your thoughts or question?
Yeah, I didn't want to stop the conversation on the World Health Organization. We are actually beating down that door as well, Jason. And, we are getting actually a lot of pressure to get ourselves listed on the World Health Organization website. Hydrocephalus isn't listed. It's typically seen as a subcondition of spina bifida internationally. So we're not recognized as our own individual condition. So that has been an interesting challenge for us. I just wanted to share, I really appreciated a lot of the thoughts that the panelists shared about how they have waded into or are continuing to wade into international waters, because we are, doing that as well. I think research was the easiest place for us. We do have a large network for discovery scientists or science that has scientists from all over the world, over 400 scientists from around the world who are engaging at some level on neurological conditions and hydrocephalus and where that overlaps. And there are international guidelines for normal pressure hydrocephalus coming out of Japan right now that members of our board and our medical advisory board are participating in. And so we are doing a lot in the medical space internationally and in the research space. We, as the largest hydrocephalus organization in the world, we receive calls from all over the world and emails and social media messages from patients around the globe that we can't help. And it's just so tragic because the medical systems are so different and access to neurosurgeons is so challenging. And even getting the devices, we've even had doctors call us and ask us if we can help get them shunts for their patients in their countries. And so we are kind of being asked to play this international role. We're not equipped for it from a resourcing or staff perspective, but we can't leave people hanging. And these are people we've lost so many children because parents weren't able to receive care in their own home countries. So we developed an app for patients to use to manage their hydrocephalus. And that has really actually thrust us, whether we were ready to or not, into the international space, because we have users around the world who are using the app. Now doctors who are approaching us about the app, and doctors at the big society meetings who are asking us to help them get groups started in their countries. And so I feel like the Hydrocephalus Association is going to go there whether we want to or not. And we actually want to. Diane, our CEO, and I, and I'm the COO, we do want to move into this realm, but we're trying to be very cognizant of how quickly we can based on our staff. So I know I'm probably going to follow up with a couple of you. Cindy, I was really interested in the international federations you started. But, there are only four other hydrocephalus groups in the world, Australia and Sweden and Great Britain. And so, we're excited to help in Canada. And so we're excited to help other groups get started so that we can start doing some resource sharing as well. We also, Jason, allow people to publish our documents in their home languages. We just ask them for a copy so we have it available as well, so that we can share it for anybody who needs it, who contacts us. So those were just my thoughts listening to everybody talk. It was really exciting to hear how people started moving into this space. And Jason, we are going to try and do that World Health Organization thing too. We're trying to find somebody to sponsor us so that we can get on their radar. So I don't know, good luck to us, I guess, on that. But
Thank you, Amanda. You brought up something we all sort of touched on, but haven't really had full discussion on, is the whole translation of materials. And, you translating your website, your educational materials, how are you handling all of that? So we'll table that for a second. Donna, you have your hand up. Would you like to share?
Sure. We were fortunate enough to have staff in Geneva last week when I was flaunting around the UK and participating in meetings with WHO. I think part of the overall way we were able to get, into relationship was certainly, building on otherwise, connected adjacent communities. And so our relationships with the HIV community and viral hepatitis and those connections. And so there has been recognition of viral hepatitis programs for quite a while with, integration at the WHO website and World Hepatitis Day coming right out of the WHO director's office. And so I really saw an opportunity for an even larger engagement with fatty liver disease being so prevalent and concurrent with diabetes and obesity, and to really be in a larger sort of public health position for liver diseases in general. And so that's the evolution of our relationship now. And it has come with invitations to participate in our International NASH Day, that we've had WHO representation, and just starting to share with them, particularly with our global medical and community partners, how important this was and how this does align with other WHO goals. And so I think that paying attention to alignment with goals that they've already set up for healthy and sustainable communities, and integration into, for our cases where it made sense, into food and other things that they were already doing, has been a reason that we've been able to advance in that relationship. I do think that for something as prevalent as liver disease, it makes sense for us to put our resources and time in this area. I think it will also help our rare liver diseases get more attention and resources through this larger strategy as well.
Great, thank you, Donna. Selena, did you want to add to that?
Thanks, Lisa. Just back to Jason's question about WHO. In my experience, this role at Women Heart is my first domestic non-global experience in a long, long time. And one thing that I've learned is if you just show up, if you're on the ground, if you're just in kind of the environs, you will get picked up by, you know, folks that are looking for a psoriasis speaker or somebody that wants, you know, a patient voice. And so I'm always conflicted. I'm always of two minds because it's a decent investment to fly out to Geneva or wherever. And you sort of, you know, for small organizations like ours, those are real trade-offs that we have to make. And but what I can tell you is if a goal or an aim is to become part of the global conversation, showing up for a World Health Assembly 2 weeks where there are various events that are happening, you don't have to have a pass into the Palais. There are things happening in you know, sort of side events all over Geneva for those 2 weeks. You will come away with something, I guarantee. But the question is, are you willing to do that without a specific aim, right? So it's a gamble, but I think for those of us who have participated in these meetings, they more often than not pay off.
Great advice. Thank you, Selena. I wonder if there's an opportunity for folks to partner. You know, you take 1 week, we'll take the next week, and you know, we'll be feet on the ground together, kind of thing. But I'm curious for the group how folks have handled translations. You know, different people have mentioned patients coming to them through, I think Jason, you mentioned through texting or through the website. Are they can't be all English speaking, right? So how are folks handling that with your website content and your patient to patient connections? Anybody?
I can chime in again. In the MS Society, so because there's an MS International Federation, we have access to, you know, people who have MS organizations, and we do lean into that. They do some significant translations, mainly Spanish, Arabic, or probably Italian. The Italian MS Society does a lot of that. But for our call center and for our website, we focus on Spanish speaking. So we have a Spanish content, and people are talking about international hits you get on your website. So our Spanish speaking content is the most widely accessed outside of the United States. And then and we do have a couple of our navigators. We have about 70 MS navigators. And so we have a handful, I think we're up to 6 navigators who are bilingual in Spanish. And then we use a resource. We use one of those you can call and get any language resource for our call center. So we do that when we don't have, when we don't know the language. I wish we're so stupid in the United States, I'm telling you, it's just people speak so many languages. It is a challenge. But anyway, it's not perfect. It's not perfect.
Yeah. Wow. No, thank you for offering those suggestions. Dawn.
Oh, sorry, Glenn.
Hi, yes, thank you. I'm Dawn Rodolini with the National Hemophilia Foundation, and we certainly partner with the World Federation of Hemophilia, which translates their materials into 5 languages. But in the United States, our website is in English and Spanish. Totally agree. We have so much more work to do. But what we've found, there are 147 member organizations across the world, which we are one of, for the World Federation. And what we found is that there's typically someone from that organization that will reach out. We give them access to our materials, and then we'll either work together to help find funding to translate those materials into their language, depending on where in the 147 countries that they're from, or we'll connect them with WFH to be able to translate those materials. So I agree, there's no sense in recreating the wheel. All the information is accurate and valid, and sometimes maybe it has to be culturally shifted. So that's also something, but they'll do some subtitling on videos, which is very cost effective, and then translation of print materials. But we give them all of the electronic resources so they can do that online, and then they can take it and print from there and distribute.
Great, thank you, Dawn. There's so many options in the world we live in today, but Selena, did you have something to add here?
Yeah, just that we're actually looking to AI, things like ChatGPT, to help us with the translation. If we think about the aggregation of knowledge, I mean, that's a great use of what I think some of us can be skeptical about. But in this case, I think that's where it can be really powerful.
Great, thank you. I know we recently at the meeting I spoke about in Barcelona, we had people speaking a couple of different languages, and we used a company called Boost Lingo, and they were able to translate in real time from anywhere. So a huge benefit and great company. If anybody wants a contact there, I'd be happy to share. Other thoughts, questions, not necessarily related to translation, but just into your challenges or successes internationally? How about on the topic of volunteers? How are you all utilizing your volunteers or not? How are you connecting with them in different countries? Are you finding that effective? Any thoughts there? Okay.
I'll if you, I don't want to talk too much, but there's a couple of ways. One thing that I find to be hugely valuable is to have a couple of champions, one on my national board who is engaged internationally and participates on the board of the MS International Federation with me, and another influential leadership volunteer as well. They are huge champions, because there are still people, especially more and more these days, who are you should spend everything in the US, and you should, this is extra, and we believe it's a part of how we're going to reach a cure, a world free of MS, which is the vision we have in this in the National MS Society. That's one thing. Another thing is, someone mentioned there are countries or places in the world where people are asking for some support. How do you do this? So we've just been part of helping to launch, and I'm really proud that they have just launched the National MS Society of the UAE, United Arab Emirates. We've been working with them for 2 years, and there is a board of volunteers, a group of volunteers that we were engaged with. I went over there one time and did a volunteer leadership training. So there that kind of sharing and moving information across, but especially when empowering people to form their own societies, volunteerism is very important. We've done some sort of people who've come over to intern with us from Brazil, for example, or from actually we had somebody from Kenya who came and stayed for a summer in one of our locations and learned about how to form a society. So, and this was, essentially the same thing you do when you have any student transfer. You find somebody who's going to be their home. It didn't cost really a lot, somebody who would be, who would host them for a few weeks and kind of do all that and then put together a program. So it's been a wonderful relationship. And now there's an MS Society in Kenya. So that took many years to accomplish, but it started with that one person.
Yeah, I think it often does. And then, I think we become much more believable if we go into these countries, with somebody who's there. But in mentioning the development of these organizations, Cindy, you mentioned them and several others have. I'm curious about any contractual relationship that might exist between some of these sort of allied groups that you all have been working with. any kind of memorandum of understanding, or, it's hard to have a reporting relationship. Donna, sorry, Cindy.
I was just going to say, we have, of course, we're on the board of the MS International Federation. So that's kind of a really close relationship, and it's been a hard thing. So I'm interested the answer to this question, because the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, would like to have a formal agreement. And we've now, the princesses from the Crown Prince courts would like, to do this in person and have official signing. So we went through a process in our legal team to say, what can we sign on for with the UAE? There's no financial transfer, although I'm going to get to that with them because they have resources that they can provide. But for this case, it's really just intellectual kind of and support back and forth. But yeah, we're working on that, and that'll be the first one really that we've done with that country or any country.
And Lisa, I can speak to the Community Advisory Board. We do have a memorandum of understanding with every member of the Community Advisory Board and members that are interested in participating. We also have a CDA with them, and that's renewable annually, so that we make sure that they understand what their role is, what their responsibility is, the fact that they have to attend meetings and in person for several days, and then we reimburse for their travel. So we do have all of that in place when we speak to, especially, with the interaction with companies and talking about protocols and other confidential information.
Great. Thank you.
We have two models at the Global Liver Institute. So we have a memorandum of understanding for independent organizations that choose to affiliate with us. And it just sets some clear expectations, mutual, because in some cases we have acted as their fiscal agent, particularly when they got started, and they needed to meet some specific milestones, for example, and ways that they are and are not allowed to use our logo and as well as the expectations they could have for us for various technical assistance or support or areas of our website. So we want to set up those clear expectations, even as they're independent organizations. Some of them actually were incubated as part of our Advanced Advocacy Academy, and people wanted to go on and create their own organizations. And so we sort of supported and mentored them into doing that. Some have been chapters of other organizations or organizations that have been developed now, or getting more physician initiated community organizations that want to be part of the larger network for information sharing, best practice sharing, collective policy work. There are cases, though, increasingly as our path forward, where GLI will directly create a community organization, and those would be under our own 501c3. And so we're seeing that sort of dual model growing. But as a former federal prosecutor, yes, I always have an agreement for something.
Great. Thank you. Randy, can we hear from Jessica real quick before we move on?
Sure.
Okay. Jessica?
Well, hi, everybody. Sorry, I was exercising, so I couldn't get on video. But I think in terms of, talking about the agreements, and also something I put in chat about our organization getting half of our screening traffic globally, but understanding that as we're entering into that space, there are legal and regulatory frameworks and environments globally that are so far from us and what we understand in the US. I think that's going to be a big hurdle, even freedom of speech, and what insurance you might need to cover claims that you make scientifically if you're operating in other countries. There are countries in the world that have a high mental health need, but would certain of our speakers or staff participants be safe if they went to those countries to travel or speak? So I think that for an organization, we just don't have sometimes the resources, considering going global, to just understand legal regulations, some of the basic ways we really interact with other communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. It can be hard to prioritize and maintain your bandwidth, and I understand. Amanda, did you want to comment real quick? And then I know, Randy, we've got to.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to share, this was a huge issue for us, was we were bringing people the UK government gave money for our app and the nonprofit that we're working with in the UK. And it was a small, it was $5,000, which is not a lot of money especially when you're talking about app development, which can be, $50,000, $60,000 on different iterations. But, I wanted, they really needed us to provide them with, some branding and stuff as a thank you. But it got into a conversation about, well, how long does that commitment last, right? Because the maintenance of the app is still falling financially and resource-wise on our association. And so I think that that's a really interesting consideration as we're all looking into these partnerships, whether we're looking at, app development or resource sharing and resource development, is that the sharing of the labor and the cost of keeping all of these resources updated and maintained, and how our legal documents we really should have some form of agreements. I think when you form a coalition, an international coalition, that would have the documentation around it about what the expectations are for each of the members who join it. But when you're entering these one-off, I do think it's important because I really felt like I was putting myself in a situation where now I have to troubleshoot people from other countries in different time zones who can't log into the app, and I'm going to be up at 3 a.m. because I'm the one who does the tech at NHA. What is all of the fallout of that on entering into these agreements, and how long should those agreements last? So I'm very pro putting it all in writing. I will say that, but I'm still trying to navigate that because, of course, I just want to give everything away because I just want to help our patient community and partner with people. So,
all right. I think maybe our last comment here, Selena.
Yeah, just it occurred to me, Randy, that I think a great role for the NHC could be as a clearinghouse for all of these lessons. If there's a mechanism in grad school, I think about the case study method and how we learned from case studies. And I wonder if any, these experiences that could be collected in that format, so that we can all sort of, move beyond the challenges that each of us have faced as organizations trying to do this work.
Well, thank you, Selena. That was a great segue into I want to thank you all for a very informative conversation on how we as a patient community can better understand and support patient engagement, advocacy, and access and innovation throughout the world. So I appreciate everybody's comments, and I know Randy has asked me to invite you all to add comment to the chat so that we can really use our time when we gather back together in October, really efficiently. So great ideas. Randy?
Thanks, Lisa. Great job in kind of really drawing out all those remarks in the discussion. So yeah, Selena, you really did kind of set the stage nicely because, I kind of been brainstorming with myself and my colleagues here about, so what role could the National Health Council play? And like all the organizations that are members, their bandwidth issues and, our mandate is really US focused, but yet our patient mission, our values don't know boundaries. And so how could we, support this conversation going forward, create a space where all of our member organizations and others, could contribute and at least make everyone aware of what's been done, what models are working, what materials might be translated in, one language or another. Some might be condition specific, others might be about, being an effective patient advocate in your system. There's lots of different ways that I think we could support patients and the patient community internationally. And part of it might be a clearinghouse. Are people aware of the meetings that are occurring internationally? Would it be helpful to know who might be attending some of those meetings? And we could send them armed with our questions or comments, or maybe get some kind of report back. I mean, really, I am very open to the suggestions of this group and our membership. Certainly our sponsors who've been quiet today, but I know would have ideas for us because, they are so exactly as Stellis, Johnson & Johnson, and Merck, terrific partners to all of our organizations, including the National Health Council, and really understand the international nature of all of our collective missions and what we might do together. So I think, it's there for us to kind of brainstorm about and move forward. You will receive an evaluation immediately after this meeting. And I would encourage you, in addition to the chat, to put your suggestions there. If you feel like there's work we might like to do between now and our next forum, what would that be? What could we bring forward for you in the interim, or what kind of conversations might we spark? Julia mentioned the patient engagement open forum that's taking place in Italy. Let's see, the June 13 to 16. That's being sponsored by the patient-focused medicine development organization. Many National Health Council members are part of that organization. They've got wonderful resources and things to share. So I'd really encourage us to look to organizations like PFMD and others as ready partners and stakeholders in this conversation. There we've got the slide showing all of the other upcoming events. We've got a lot going on this year. You probably saw us come out of the pandemic, like shot out of a cannon, to really meet the needs and expectations and the synergies that exist across our membership. I think this discussion around international is one of those. Something that didn't come up so much today, but I know has been an issue for many of our organizations, and that's in the policy arena. Sometimes U.S. policies are informed or influenced by activities occurring abroad. That might be everything from foreign reference pricing to supply chain issues. We know that certain states are still encouraging permission to import medicines from abroad, devices from abroad directly. What does that mean for safety and effectiveness and the ability of patients and patient organizations to trust what might be available through those channels? So I think there's also, things in the policy arena that we would want to be informed of and kind of tracking, in addition to all of the things that would go to support individual patients in having access to the medicines and care, to the devices and support that we know are so important to their health and well-being. So thank you, each and every one of you, for being a part of this call. We had a great turnout. We will be putting this 2-hour session on the website. We could easily create a space on the website for additional information sharing. So I really leave it to you to be kind of partners to us and decide what is the role and the way in which the National Health Council can support all of your organizations individually and collectively. I am truly amazed at the depth of activity that's already occurring, the rich experience that we have, the models that have been developed. I think at a minimum, we should do what the National Health Council does best, and that is to be a convener, to share from a consensus perspective what we feel are good best practices or lessons learned about pathways not to take. This is all one of the really terrific member benefits and ways in which we can advance our mission collectively. So thank you to all of our presenters today, for all of you that participated. This has been really time very well spent, and I think important next steps will come from what we're doing here that'll support all of the organizations that are active in this space and others that really do feel a kindred spirit with patients across the world to be effective here. So thank you all. Lisa, any last comment to make as we close?
Thanks so much, Randy. I mean, well said. I think my comment would just be that there's clearly value and interest in this continued collaboration and sharing. So thank you all.
Terrific. Well, that's wonderful. Well, thank you all very much. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.